Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370. Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 was a Boeing 777-200ER, carrying 239 people on a routine overnight journey from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing on March 8, 2014. It was one of the airline's regular flights between two capitals, and everything seemed normal as it took off just after midnight with more than enough fuel for the trip. For the first 39 minutes, the flight progressed as expected. Then came the last radio exchange with air traffic control, a standard handover from Malaysian to Vietnamese controllers. Moments later, the aircraft's transponder went silent, cutting off its identification on civilian radar. Military radar later revealed something baffling. Instead of continuing towards China, the plane had veered sharply west, crossing the Malay Peninsula and heading over the Andaman Sea. What happened next remains one of aviation's greatest mysteries. Satellite data later showed the aircraft kept flying for hours, heading south into one of the most remote stretches of the Indian Ocean, until it likely ran out of fuel and vanished. No distress call was ever made. Over the years, only a handful of confirmed debris pieces have been found, starting with a wing fragment discovered on Reunion Island in 2015, with others washing up along African and Indian Ocean shores. Yet the main wreckage and flight recorders remain lost. Investigations concluded that the drastic course changes was likely intentional, but no clear culprit or motive was proven. Some theories point to crew incapacitation, others to deliberate sabotage. Even former leaders have hinted at suspicions of a murder-suicide, though evidence is lacking. Searches have spanned years, oceans, and millions of dollars, the latest in 2025 using advanced underwater drones. Still, MH370's final resting place and the truth of what happened that night remains hidden beneath the waves. MH370 left the world with questions that may never be answered. But it wasn't the first time the Atlantic claimed a passenger jet. Just years earlier, another flight vanished into the night, not in silence, but in a storm, where ice, confusion, and split-second mistakes turned a routine journey into disaster. Air France Flight 447. Departing Rio de Janeiro on the night of May 31, 2009, Air France Flight 447 was operated by an Airbus A330-203, received by the airline in 2005. The aircraft was making a routine overnight trip to Paris with 228 passengers and crew. High over the Atlantic, the aircraft flew into a storm. Ice crystals began forming in the pitot tubes, the small sensors that measure airspeed, blocking them and sending unreliable readings to the cockpit. The autopilot disengaged, forcing the pilots to take manual control in the middle of severe turbulence. Confused by conflicting warnings and faulty instruments, the crew pulled the nose up, likely thinking they were losing altitude. In reality, this caused the plane to enter a high-altitude aerodynamic stall, where the wings lose lift. The stall alarm blared again and again, but the crew did not push the nose down to recover. For over 3 minutes, the aircraft descended in near freefall until it struck the ocean, killing everyone aboard. Brazil's Navy recovered some wreckage and bodies within days, but the flight recorders remained missing for almost 2 years. When they were finally found in 2011, investigators pieced together the final moments. The French BEA's 2012 report concluded that the disaster began with pitot tube icing and was made worse by pilot misinterpretation and improper stall recovery. The report also pointed to deeper issues: cockpit design flaws, unclear alerts, and inadequate pilot training for manual flight at high altitude. Airbus's flight control systems, designed to protect against dangerous maneuvers, had been compromised by the faulty sensor data, allowing the stall to continue unchecked. The crash of Air France 447 was born from ice, confusion, and human error. But years earlier, another tragedy struck for a very different reason: a hijacking that forced a jet toward a destination it could never reach. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961. On November 23, 1996, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961, a Boeing 767-260ER, took off from Addis Ababa for Nairobi, the first leg of a multi-stop trip to Abidjan. 20 minutes into the flight, 3 young men, drunk and desperate, stormed the cockpit. They claimed to have had a bomb, which turned out to be nothing more than a liquor bottle wrapped to look dangerous. Their demand was shocking: fly them to Australia to seek asylum. Captain Lul Abate tried to explain the truth. The plane only had enough fuel for the short hop to Nairobi. But the hijackers refused to believe him. Under threat, the crew flew along the African coast, secretly steering toward the Comoros Islands as fuel levels dropped to a critical low. Eventually, both engines flamed out, turning the 767 into a powerless glider. Captain Abate fought to keep control while also trying to reason with the hijackers. He aimed for a water landing near La Galois Beach on Grande Comore, hoping to touch down parallel to the waves to soften the impact. But just seconds before landing, the left wing clipped a coral reef. The aircraft twisted violently, cartwheeled across the water, and broke apart. The fuselage sank quickly, and many passengers tragically drowned after inflating their life jackets inside the cabin, which pinned them against the ceiling underwater. Local residents, divers, and tourists rushed into the waves to rescue survivors. Out of 175 people on board, 125 died, including the hijackers, while around 50 survived, many injured. The investigation praised Captain Abate and First Officer Jonas Mercuria for their courage and skill in the face of an unprecedented crisis. Their quick thinking saved dozens of lives, and their ordeal highlighted vital lessons about cockpit security, hijacking protocols, and proper passenger safety training. Ethiopian Airlines 961 proved how human threats can push a flight into catastrophe. But just 4 years later, another jet would plunge into the ocean, and this time not because of hijackers, but because of a single false warning that set off a fatal chain of mistakes. Kenya Airways Flight 431. Kenya Airways Flight 431, an Airbus A310 known as Harambee Star, took off from Abidjan's Félix Houphouët-Boigny International Airport on a warm January night in 2000. The flight was supposed to make a short stop in Lagos before continuing to Nairobi, carrying nearly 180 people across West and East Africa. But just seconds after leaving the runway, alarms shattered the comm. A stall warning blared, later found to be false, right as the first officer called to retract the landing gear. Instead of climbing, the crew began a controlled descent, leaving the landing gear still down. The ground proximity warning briefly sounded, only to be overridden by another alarm, and then came a chilling master warning for overspeed. The captain ordered a climb, but by then the aircraft was dropping far too fast. In the darkness over the Atlantic, there were no city lights, no horizon, just black water rushing up to meet them. The Airbus slammed into the ocean barely 1.2 miles from shore, breaking apart instantly. Out of 179 souls on board, only 10 survived. It was the deadliest accident in Côte d'Ivoire's history and the worst ever involving an Airbus A310. The investigation, led by the Ivorian government with help from France's BEA and Canada's Transportation Safety Board, found that the pilots had reacted incorrectly to the false stall alarm. They followed part of the recovery steps but didn't add full power, level the wings, or retract the speed brakes. With no visual cues in the night sky over water, they had no way to sense how close they were to the surface. Lion Air Flight 610. A Boeing 737 MAX 8, only a few months into service, carried Lion Air Flight 610 out of Jakarta on October 29, 2018, bound for Pangkal, Penang. This short domestic flight in Indonesia was expected to last under an hour, with 189 people on board. But only minutes after takeoff, the aircraft began to behave strangely. Faulty readings from one of its angle of attack sensors fed false data into a hidden software system called MCAS, designed to automatically push the nose down if it thought the plane was about to stall. Believing the aircraft was in danger, MCAS activated again and again, forcing the nose lower each time. The pilots fought to pull it back up, but the system kept overriding their commands. Unbeknownst to the passengers, the same aircraft had shown similar problems on earlier flights. Maintenance crews had tried to fix the issue, but the underlying fault remained. In the cockpit, the crew attempted resets, but the battle against MCAS continued. Within minutes, the 737 MAX was in a steep dive, plunging into the Java Sea and killing everyone on board. The investigation, led by Indonesia's NTSC with help from the US NTSB, revealed a deadly chain of failures. The faulty sensor had likely been installed or calibrated incorrectly, triggering MCAS unnecessarily. Boeing had not told pilots exactly how MCAS worked or that it could repeatedly activate based on a single sensor. Training manuals contained no detailed instructions on how to counter it. Maintenance procedures were inadequate, and oversight from both Boeing and the FAA failed to catch these flaws before tragedy struck. The disaster led to worldwide grounding of the 737 MAX fleet, urgent updates to pilot training, major changes to certification process, and legal action against Boeing, including fraud charges and a massive settlement. Indonesia AirAsia Flight 8501. On December 28, 2014, Indonesia AirAsia Flight 8501, an Airbus A320-216 delivered in 2008, was preparing for what should have been a routine trip from Surabaya to Singapore. The 6-year-old jet had flown thousands of hours and completed over 13,000 flights, regularly serving business travelers and holidaymakers across the region. That morning, 162 people boarded, expecting a short, uneventful journey. At first, the flight progressed smoothly. Cruising at 32,000 feet, the pilots requested to climb to 38,000 feet to avoid a gathering storm. Moments later, without sending any distress call, the aircraft vanished from radar over the Java Sea. Hours later, floating debris confirmed the unthinkable. There were no survivors. The investigation led by Indonesia's NTSC, with help from international experts, stumbled upon a disturbing chain of events. A reoccurring fault in the aircraft's rudder travel limiter unit, a device that controls how far the rudder can move, had been appearing for over a year, triggered by a cracked solder joint on its circuit board. On this flight, the same fault caused 4 warning alarms in the cockpit within minutes. On the 4th, the crew tried to fix it by resetting the flight augmentation computer circuit breakers, but this action shut down both systems, disabling the autopilot and automatic engine controls, and switching the aircraft into a degraded alternate law mode that removed many of its built-in safety protections. Without these protections, the aircraft shot upward, climbing about 6,500 feet in less than a minute before stalling. Instead of regaining lift, it remained in the stall, plunging toward the sea. Miscommunication between the pilots worsened the crisis. The captain's vague instructions to pull down was misunderstood as pulling back on the controls, while at one point, the 2 pilots were unknowingly making opposite control inputs, sealing the aircraft's fate. Egypt Air Flight 990. On October 31, 1999, Egypt Air Flight 990, a Boeing 767-300ER named Tuthmosis III, was flying a routine passenger service from Los Angeles to Cairo with a stop at New York's JFK. Delivered new in 1989, the aircraft had logged more than 33,000 flight hours and over 7,500 takeoff-landing cycles. It was one of the airline's trusted workhorses, bridging the United States and Egypt across the Atlantic. The first part of the journey was uneventful, but while cruising high above the Atlantic, about 60 miles south of Nantucket Island, the calm was shattered. Without warning, the jet entered a sudden, steep dive from its cruising altitude. The descent was violent and uncontrollable, ending in a devastating impact with the ocean. All 217 passengers and crew perished instantly. The investigation became one of the most controversial in aviation history. The U.S. National Transportation Safety Board and Egypt's Civil Aviation Authority both took part, but their conclusions clashed. The NTSB ruled out mechanical failure as the main cause. Their analysis pointed to deliberate control inputs from the relief first officer, disengaging the autopilot, cutting engine thrust, and commanding opposite elevator movements, actions that triggered the fatal plunge. Yet no clear motive was ever found. The Egyptian investigation rejected that theory. They suggested the cause could have been a mechanical malfunction, specifically in the elevator control system or its power units. But the NTSB ran extensive tests and found that these scenarios did not match the flight data or recorded behavior of the aircraft. Tuninter Flight 1153. Tuninter Flight 1153 left Bari, Italy on August 6, 2005. Aboard an ATR 72-202 turboprop manufactured in 1991, en route to Djerba, Tunisia. On board were 35 passengers, mostly Italian tourists and 4 Tunisian crew members, plus a flight engineer traveling as a passenger. It was a short, routine hop across the Mediterranean, and nothing hinted at the disaster that was about to strike. Unknown to anyone, a deadly maintenance mistake had already sealed the aircraft's fate. During earlier servicing, mechanics had installed the wrong fuel gauge, one meant for the smaller ATR 42, not the ATR 72. This gave fuel readings far higher than the reality. Ground crews, trusting the faulty gauge, filled the tanks with far less fuel than needed. Climbing through 23,000 feet, the right engine suddenly failed. Just over a minute later, the left engine quit too. Both had flamed out from fuel starvation. The pilots, unaware of the real fuel situation, tried desperately to restart the engines and declared an emergency, requesting to divert to Palermo, Sicily. For 16 long minutes, the powerless aircraft glided toward the coast, but the runway was just out of reach. At about 145 miles per hour, the ATR struck the Mediterranean roughly 26 miles northeast of Palermo. The impact tore the fuselage into 3 pieces. 16 of the 39 people on board died, some from the brutal crash forces, others trapped underwater. The 23 survivors were mostly seated toward the rear, where the damage was less severe. The investigation revealed a chain of errors. Faulty maintenance records allowed the wrong fuel indicator to be installed. Fueling calculations were based on false readings, and in the crisis, the pilots focused on engine restarts instead of maximizing glide efficiency. Tests later showed that with the right procedures, feathering the propellers and flying at optimal glide speed, the plane could have made Palermo's runway. The crash led to criminal trials in Italy. The captain, co-pilot, and airline officials were convicted of negligence and manslaughter, though sentences were reduced on appeal. Precision Air Flight 494. Precision Air Flight 494 was a 12-year-old ATR 42-500 turboprop, registration 5HPWF, lovingly nicknamed Bukoba. Delivered to the airline in August 2010, it was powered by two Pratt & Whitney Canada PW127 engines. On this day, it was flying a routine domestic route from Dar es Salaam with a stop in Mwanza before heading to its final destination, Bukoba, a trip the crew had likely done many times before. As the flight approached Bukoba, the weather turned dangerous. Heavy rain, strong turbulence, and thick clouds made it almost impossible to see. The pilots pressed on, lining up for the runway, but the aircraft came in too low. About 1,600 feet short of the airport, it struck the waters of Lake Victoria in what was almost a controlled landing, until the fuselage broke on impact. Water rushed in, rescue boats raced toward the scene, but in the chaos, 2 pilots and 17 passengers drowned, leaving 19 dead and 24 survivors. Investigators from Tanzania's Aircraft Accident Investigation Branch, with help from France's BEA and ATR engineers, later pieced together what happened. Their approach had been unstable from the start, with the plane descending too fast in poor weather, battling crosswinds and turbulence. With no air traffic control at Bukoba to guide them, the crew relied only on their instruments. The onboard warning system shouted sink rate and pull up, but the alerts came too late, or weren't acted on in time. The report made it clear. The captain chose to push through a narrow gap in the weather instead of diverting to Mwanza. That risky decision, combined with high stress and low visibility, led to a deadly loss of situational awareness. Survivors remember water filling the front cabin as flight attendants fought to open exits, and local fishermen rushed in to pull people from the sinking plane, a rescue effort that, for many, made the difference between life and death.